everybody, I'm Toluca from Markers and Minions, and tonight is the final video in my 2-week-long series of live videos for Unit 1 planning. I'm getting a lot of questions asking if I plan on doing this for every unit, and the answer is no. I would love to, but it's too hard doing weeknights with my husband having to be on full-time dad duty, and the girls, I got to be home with the girls. So it's tricky to do it in the week, during the week. I've thought maybe, also people are asking me if I could write up notes and extension ideas and an anchor chart, the things that I've been doing anyway for planning for the other units. And maybe is my answer. I don't really want to commit to a project like last year with the close reading companions, where I had to race against everyone in the group to get the resource done before people got to that unit. So I don't really want that stress on me again this year. I gained 15 pounds last year. I was super stressed. It was hard. I don't know if it looked easy, but it was really hard making those close reading companions. This is a lot easier for me, making, my daughter got into my stickies. Making these plans, because planning is just quick and easy for me, and the anchor chart is, but we'll see. And if I do that, then I might film planning videos just digitally, while I'm filling these out. I might just do a screen recording with me talking. So I won't be doing them live, but there are other options that I am kind of exploring for these. So tonight, 6th grade Unit 1, my curriculum, my benchmark program goes up to 6th grade, but my national login that I have doesn't have 6th grade. So just like Kinder, my national login, I don't have access to Kinder or 6th grade. So I had to only plan the California edition. But if you are here from national, using the national edition, you can use the same sort of strategies as me, and you'll find that most of it is going to be the same. There'll be a little bit slight differences in the wording of your reading lessons, but more or less the same lessons. Some lessons might vary completely, but it's not that much. And then where you'll see differences also is in the language skill and the writing, but the spelling words and the phonics, and like I said, most of the reading lessons are going to be probably the same. So I'm going to be using these templates. These are free on my Teachers Pay Teachers store. They always have been for the last 2 years. So you can go and download them there. This is what I always use during my planning videos. And I don't have the TRS, but what I did do is I went online and I took screenshots of the TRS. So I'm going to be planning using, this is a screenshot of week 1, this is a screenshot of week 2, and week 3. So I'm going to be planning using this view. This is found in your TRS at the beginning of each week. So teachers, when you open up week 1, before you start going into day 1 and all those lessons, you'll see a page that kind of looks like this. It lists all your lesson numbers. It has the pictures of the text on the side, and it's got the spelling words and the vocabulary words on the bottom there. So that's what I'm pulling from. And National Edition teachers, yours looks a little bit more like this. This is from 5th grade last night. So it's going to be the same exact lessons, just put in a 5-day grid. So this is what yours would look like at the start of your week. You would just pull your skills out from here, all right? So first things first, the reason why I even do this, that all of this information is in the TRS. So it's done for you. It's not that it's not done. It's not that it's even a necessary thing to do, but I just found that it's something that really helps me in my teaching, because as I'm filling out these blank templates, literally with the stuff from the TRS, I'm extracting everything, and in doing that, I'm processing, I'm analyzing, and I'm making decisions. So the decisions I make might not be the decisions that you make, but it allows you to be flexible, and it allows you to close your TRS and get out of it eventually, because it's easy to get stuck in there and try to follow the exact pacing and try to fit everything in, when it's really, at least I haven't found that it's really realistic. So while I'm planning, I'm noticing patterns, I'm noticing what spirals, I'm taking note of like, well, what can I maybe skip that week, or what do I need to pre-teach? What can I combine? Okay, so I'm making those sorts of decisions for myself. All right, so as I'm planning and I'm sharing my thinking around the week, if you are thinking that you want to go in a different direction, like it's totally up to you. This is your time. So what I write in my template might not be exactly what you write in your template, and that's okay. I think the whole goal is just so that you feel that you have the ability to be flexible, okay? And to make it yours, make this unit yours. All right, so like the other grade levels, as I was planning, I just kept a page of notes where I typed up my thoughts and some of my strategies. I came up with a page of extension ideas, which I don't think I printed out, but just ways that you could enhance each week. I think some of my options, some of my suggestions were like you could have a Socratic seminar. There's a research project involved in there if you wanted to go in that direction. But anyway, all of this stuff that I kind of put together while I was planning, I will give you a link, and you can go straight to that link and input your email, and it'll get automatically emailed to you, and you can just download the files. All right, so anchor chart for 6th grade Unit 1. So the big idea here is democracy. So I thought it would be good to do an anchor chart that kind of introduces and pre-teaches that concept. Now, in week 1, you're reading about democracy and what has inspired democracy throughout history. And then in week 2, you're reading about Queen Elizabeth I. And then in week 3, you're reading about Queen Elizabeth II, and the differences in the types of, the differences in their roles in their government. Okay, so, but I thought this would be a good way to introduce it. So I wrote the roots, what the actual term means, and then what a democracy is and what a democracy isn't. So I'm just going to read a couple of these things to you and show you where I made connections with what the kids are going to be reading. So my process was I read through all the texts, I wrote down like vocabulary that I saw come up, I wrote down key concepts, and then this chart is the result of it. So a democracy is a type of government that's run by the people, so not a single ruler. And there's my graphic to show that, to illustrate that. People work together to make decisions for the country and its citizens. So citizens is a word that you'll see come up. And then I wrote here, disagreement, reason is stronger than force. So like in a democracy, people provide reasoning for their differences and for their disagreements, not force. Okay, and then I also found this quote by Abraham Lincoln, the ballot is stronger than the bullet. And then I talked about the inspiration for democracy, and this is going to be a direct connection to your first and your second short read. So, Amy, yes, this is something I am going to share with you. Okay? All right, so Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, so his work really, you'll read all about it, like his work influenced that whole concept of democracy. And then the Iroquois Confederacy, so a group of Native American tribes that created and shared one government. Oh, that reminds me, before even teaching your intro chart, in the story, in the text about this confederacy, it talks about one of the leaders. I can't remember the name. That's super lame. But one of the leaders, I learned it today for the first time. But so he would go around to these different tribes, and the way that he would convince these tribes to all band together and form this confederacy was he would take arrows and he would snap one in half, and then he would take a bunch of arrows and try to break them in half and give the analogy that, together we're stronger. So I thought that would be a really awesome way for you to introduce Unit 1 is like in front of the class, just get a pencil and like snap it in half, and the kids would be like, oh, and then get, a bunch of them. use a pencil that you know is like a nasty one that you don't want in your classroom anymore. And then get a bunch of great Ticonderoga pencils that you don't want to break and go like this and show that you can't break them. And then you can give that analogy of like, we're stronger together. If we work together, that's this idea of like a democracy, okay? And then you can go into your anchor chart. And then when the kids read about that analogy in their short read, they're gonna be like, oh, just like your pencil. So I thought that would be a fun way. Then I have a democracy isn't. So a democracy isn't a monarchy where one person holds all the power. And I also wrote that a monarchy is sometimes tyrannical or cruel because the idea of tyranny comes up. And then it's not an oligarchy. So and this, I don't know, I had a hard time like wrapping my mind around this and how that's different from a monarchy. But if you don't like the way I just explained it, you could always write in your own bullet point. But so I put only a few people hold the power. For example, like super wealthy, and these are my exact words, super wealthy people acting in their best interests. Okay, and then I also included this part that seems a little random, but it ties into the Queen Elizabeth text. A democracy isn't gender biased. So women are not expected to be subservient. And that idea of the role of a woman in government is explored in the first text, the first Queen Elizabeth text, and it brings in that word subservient. And so she's really challenging that notion. And then one of her quotes was, "I have the heart of a man, not a woman, and I am not afraid of anything." But I thought it would be interesting to bring that piece, that component in, and just show that like now in modern day, present day England, the queen is not, it's just not, no one's expecting women to be subservient, okay? So there's that evolution there. So I just added that in. And then I have another, that famous quote from Abe Lincoln, "Of the people, by the people, for the people." So there you go. And you have options when teaching this chart. The way that I like to do it is project it on the document camera and then trace it in pencil onto, butcher paper. And I teach it as like, I'm a Project GLAD teacher, so I teach it with marker as I'm going over it with the kids. So it's just all in pencil up there. And as they're sitting on the carpet or near me, I'm going over it with marker, each section, and I'm talking about pieces, and they're digesting and turning and talking. So it's a very like interactive lesson, and it takes time. So if you do it that way, I would suggest doing this before you start getting into your weekly text, because it's going to be hard to fit in both. But this is a really great way, and even if you're already like beginning Unit 1 or whatever, you can apply the same strategy to your other units. Okay. The other option is to just blow this up, this exact thing, tile print it, throw it up there, and then there's also in the file that you'll be emailed, there's a student version. So I literally copy pasted everything, but then I took out some of the keywords and I just put fill in the blanks so students can, take notes as you're teaching. Now the last thing I want to show you that is included as well is I just made like a quick compare contrast chart for the two queens. And my idea was that you could, prep this ahead of time, but then only like fill out one at a time. So like either do this side and then read about her, and then the next week do this side first and then read about her, or flip that, read and then make a chart about her, read, make a chart about her, and then it's side by side and it's directly like comparing and contrasting them. And I took all of these, the characteristics and then the role in government, I took all of these details from the text. All right. So let me just move this out of the way. Thank you, Amy. All right. So I'm going to be using red or pink, blue, and green. And each of these colors is going to represent one type of lesson. And in the completed plans that you will have emailed afterwards to you, they're the same color coding, so you'll be able to, yeah, have it color coded for you. All right, so the pacing tonight, if it's too fast, too slow, whatever, if it doesn't work out for you, you can just hold off and wait for these in your email. So don't feel like you need to like rush or anything. So let's get started. The essential question: why might societies form different types of government? So I'm writing that down at the top. Okay. Now my next part is going to be the close reading skills. And I'm going to actually plan horizontally, week 1, week 2, and week 3. And then I'm going to circle back and I'm going to do the vocabulary, spelling, language, okay? And the reason why I'm going to go horizontally and look at the close reading skills side by side for each week is so that I can then see what patterns come up, what repeats throughout the weeks, what doesn't repeat. And then that's going to help you make decisions as a teacher as to like what you know you need to really hit, what you might want to focus on, what you might want to just kind of expose. So it's going to help you process. So in week 1, and I'm just looking at my printout here, in week 1 you've got these 2 short reads, and this is where you're going to find your close reading lessons. So it's going to be lessons 2, 4, 5, 7, 10, and 13, and we're just going to take those strategies and we're going to lift them and put them onto our planning template. So my first one here says key details and main idea. Then I've got determine the meaning of domain-specific vocabulary as it is used in a text. So AKA what that means is it's a context clues lesson. So I'm just going to write context clues. Then my next lesson is going to be analyze the development of ideas and draw conclusions. So I think I'm going to just write for now, draw conclusions. Then I see for the second short read, that first lesson that immediately follows whenever you read a new text is always going to be that key details main idea. So it's the same thing, basically repeated. So I'm not going to write it again on my chart. You can if you want to, but for me personally, I know it's the same skill. Okay, so the next one on my list is determine the meaning of figurative language. So I'm just going to write figurative language. Then I see point of view. And then last but not least, down at the bottom, there's always going to be a cross-text analysis lesson, lesson 14, and that's where you're going to be using information. You're going to be teaching the kids to integrate information from 2 sources. So in this case, in week 1, source number 1 is going to be short read 1, and source 2 will be short read 2. And what they're doing specifically is comparing views of democracy. So I'm going to write compare. And so now here are my skills just in my own shorthand, the way that I understand. I also want to highlight real quickly the build vocabulary strategy. And the reason why I pulled this out, even though it is embedded in your close reading lessons, the reason why I pulled this out is because there's not always a lesson each week that pertains to building vocabulary. So in this case of week 1, there is an explicit lesson, context clues. So I'm going to pull that out and I'm going to write it on that line there. But the point is, because it's isolated this way, you'll see that there isn't always one. And so when you notice that as a teacher, you might decide, well, even if there's not an explicit lesson that week, I know that I need to still acknowledge that there are tricky words in this complex text, and I need to go over them with my students in whatever way, whatever strategy you want to use. Thank you, Lori. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to week 2, close reading skills. So in week 2, the difference is now there's just one extended read. Okay, so all of your close reading lessons are just going to pertain to this one text over the course of several days, multiple touches. So with that said, remember, those of you, some of you right now might be going like, oh my God, there's so many like different skills. It's all over the place. So if you're new to Benchmark, that's a little bit frightening. But the idea is like every time you go back to the text, you're doing a close read, which means you're honing in on just one piece of it. You're not necessarily reading the entire thing over again. That would be insane, overkill, right? So you're going back just to small pieces. That's one way, you know, you're going to keep it short because you're really only looking at one aspect of it. And then the idea is repeated exposure over time. So you're throwing in this, like Brittany calls it the buffet, this buffet of lessons, because the goal is to expose, model as much as you can. So week 2, we've got key details and summarize. We've got cite text evidence to support inferences and analysis. So that's going to be, I'm going to write cite text evidence. That's going to be my main objective, is teaching kids to go to the text and use it as a source in their analysis and their answering of questions. Okay, then I see determine and analyze the author's point of view. So I'm going to write point of view, and my brain just went ding, 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 because I remember in week 1, there is a point of view lesson. So I see now immediately, okay, if in week 1, if you don't get to it, not the end of the world. It's going to come up again. If you know you've gotten to that 20-minute mark and you know you're not supposed to be doing a maxi lesson, you can go, it's okay, we got this, we'll come back to it in week 2. Okay, and then determine the meaning of figurative language to analyze point of view. So now there's sort of like a marriage of skills here. In week 1, I know I have the figurative language and the point of view lesson. In week 2, I have the point of view, and now I have one that's using both of those skills together. So that tells me like that's a focus. That seems to be an essential focus throughout this unit. Figurative language. That's what that looks like so far. And then finally, that last lesson is going to be integrate information from multiple texts. So I'm just going to write integrate info. Okay. Now, notice in week 2, I don't see that there's an explicit vocabulary lesson. Now the figurative language, I haven't gone into that lesson. I haven't opened my TRS to really know what we're focusing on there. So that is a lesson around words, right? Text, but I don't really think it's going to be like a vocabulary lesson. So just at first glance, I'm going to write none. Okay, so mental note, I'm still going to have to allow the kids to, you know, circle unfamiliar words, and I'm going to have to go over it with them. All right. Now, week 3, will give you time because you're actually flipping through your TRS. It's another extended read. This time it's on the current Queen of England. Okay, and the first lesson is the key details and central ideas, or main idea. Then I see a lesson that is on genre features, so biography. And this was one of the things that stood out to me. Okay, lesson 6, week 3. And national teachers, you might not have this lesson, because I noticed that when Benchmark designed or redesigned and made the national edition, they took out a lot of these genre features lessons. So this pertains, I think, mainly to California. But that lesson, going over the features of a biography and waiting until week 3 seemed a little bit odd to me, because you are going to be reading a biographical text in week 2 as well. So that might, I'm going to write it in week 3, but that might be something that you pre-teach, like before you get into your benchmark reading, weeks 2 and weeks 3. Just talk about what a biography is and what are some of the things that you might find in a biography. Even if you're a national teacher, why not, right? Just create like a quick anchor chart, like here are some of the features of a biographical text, and then when you are reading the text, week 2 and week 3, you can just make informal connections. Like, oh, hey, look, we're getting facts and details about her life. Oh, look, we have her death date, you know, things like that. And that's a way to also save time, because it's going to be more of like an integrated, ongoing piece rather than like a 20-minute designated whole group lesson. All right, and then we've got lesson 8, analyze the development of ideas and draw conclusions. So again, like week 1, I'm going to write draw conclusions. So that one spirals. That skill comes back. And then I see lesson 11, determine the meaning of domain-specific words. So AKA context clues. I write context clues. Sometimes it's, most of the time that's what it is. Sometimes it's word parts. Regardless, it's making sense of those domain-specific words that are otherwise very unfamiliar to the kids. All right, so now what I can do, now that I have all of my skills pulled out and, you know, laid out over the course of 3 weeks, is I can take, I'm going to take my black marker, and I'm going to just start processing, okay? And I'm going to use like this key, and these first 2 symbols are the ones that I use the most. So the spiral sign to show that something comes up again, and then an asterisk indicating that it might be a priority. Now, it might be a priority because it only comes up once over the course of the 3 weeks, so you know, like, oh, this is my only opportunity. Or it might be that, like, in week 2, we've got this lesson here that blends 2 of these lessons, the figurative language and the point of view. So in order for my students to be successful during this lesson, I should probably make sure that I get to these 2. Okay, so it's gonna be personal to you. You can go ahead and start just annotating and noticing these patterns. And I'm not going to spiral sign next to key details, main idea. I know that that's going to be going on for like the rest of the kids' lives in all grades. Like that's the close reading protocol. That's the first thing they do after they read a text. And then the other thing is like the lesson 14 is always going to be that 6.7, 6.9 reading standard where they're comparing or they're integrating information. So it's a little redundant to spiral sign those. So at first glance, I see draw conclusions, week 1 and week 3. Then I've got these lessons here, which I will asterisk because it's dependent on this lesson. I'm going to reverse that. Okay, and then this cite text evidence, that only comes up once, so that's important to get to. This genre features, like I mentioned, I might just do that before starting my 3 weeks, okay? All right. So now I'm gonna move down to spelling, and the spelling and the spelling patterns don't spiral, okay? So those you just have to do every week. They'll be different every week. So in week 1, it's short vowels. Although I will say it spirals across the grade levels. So like week 1 for almost every grade level is short vowels. It's just the words are going to be different. Then week 2 is long vowels. And week 3, closed syllable pattern. Closed syllables. and I used blue for that. All right, now for the next part, language and writing, I'm only going to use green because those are, think of them as married. So gone are the days where we're only teaching kids grammar in isolation. Not that you can't, in fact, I do on day one, but it's designed to go together in benchmark. So you'll see that the language skill for the week is going to be found underneath the writing skills. So if you actually open up that week's draft lesson, which is going to be on day 4, let me just show you what that looks like. Here's our writing, all our writing lessons: analyze, gather text evidence, plan, draft. That's not until lesson 12, day 4. But if you open up that lesson in your TRS and you're looking at your spread, on the second page there, you'll see build language, and you'll find what your grammar skill is for the week. And so, hold on a sec. The pen was starting to not work yesterday. So I went in and I found the language skill, and national teachers, like I said, this is where it kind of varies, so yours might not be the same. But for California, the language skill is week 1, subject, verb, agreement, and pronouns. Week 2 is shift in verb tense and perfect tense. And week 3 is going to be shifts in pronoun and person. And I'll hold this up in a second. All right. So now the writing, I'm going to briefly talk about California, and then I'm going to briefly talk about national. So in California, the way that our writing, the sequence or the pattern for our writing, the way it unfolds is day 1, the kids analyze a writing prompt. Day 2, the kids gather details and text evidence from the source, and the source is going to be the weekly text. Day 3 is plan, day 4 is draft, day 5 is revise and edit. So the kids really aren't starting their writing until like day 3, day 4. And so you're not necessarily like in benchmark with your benchmark writing, you're not necessarily going to have like a finished piece for your writing wall at the end of the week. Okay, it's more preparing them for, and I'll give you an example. In 3rd grade, I gave my students the interim 1 assessment in the beginning of the school year that tests end of the year standards, and it's meant to mirror like the California state test. All right. So one of the questions there was a writing prompt, and it said, imagine that you are walking through a national forest and you see a bald eagle. Tell a story about your experience. Now, my students had just read an informational text about the bald eagle and its, its significance in America, an info text that they were being asked to write a narrative, and they were not able to see the difference there. So the majority of my kids basically regurgitated what they had just read, and they wrote an informational piece about the bald eagle. Okay, so I give that example all the time, but those are the types of questions that they see on their state test. Okay, they're using a source, but then they're formulating their own ideas, and they're practicing the 3 different types of writing, so different purposes for writing. Okay, so I think that our benchmark writing sequence really prepares them well for that. Now in national, one of the main differences that I saw, especially in Unit 1, is the performance task practice. So week 1, what I've seen for the other grades is it follows that like California sequence. But then week 2 is performance task, week 3 is performance task. And that is meant to prepare them explicitly teach them the different types of questions that they will see on a performance task. So like the part A, part B questions, the constructed response, when I was just talking about where they go to a source, they bring in details and they have a written response, multi-response questions, and then questions that are cross-text analysis. So like on the state test where there's 2 sources and then they're supposed to use both of those sources in their answer. So it's explicitly teaching them how to answer those types of questions. So it doesn't really sound like writing, right? So if you're doing the performance task practices, you're definitely not going to get like your process writing product and result, okay? So that is the difference between the writing. Now for California, week 1, we've got a narrative. It's going to be like a journal entry. Week 2, it's going to be an informative essay. And it's going to be, the kids are going to be writing with the problem solution text structure. And then week 3 is always the third type, so argument. So it circulates within a unit, like you're always going to have these 3 types of writing, California teachers. All right. So now that I've done this initial plan, now it's time to actually plug these into your week and make this realistically work for you in the time that you have. So this is a representation of what my week looks like with my kids. I teach 3rd grade, so my kids typically can sit and do all of these lessons back to back with me, and then they break off and they go to their independent work, their centers, okay? That might look different for you, but for the most part, like this is what works for me. And one of the major differences that that sets this plan apart from, like, for example, this plan is that on day 1, I don't want to do a close read. I just want to read to the kids. And I've been sharing over the course of the last 2 weeks that like this is your time to read the text to them and really liven it up. Okay, there's a lot of like complaining around like the text is so boring or it's going right over their heads or whatever it is. This is your opportunity to do your singing and dancing and read through that text and make it the most exciting thing they've ever heard in their entire lives. Okay, so that's what I do on day 1. And then after we've read it, I say, okay, now I want you to read it. After I've read it, I want you to read it either by yourself or with a partner, and I want you to annotate. And they can annotate for whatever they want. They can use whatever symbols they feel like using. It's just an opportunity for them to A, practice reading the text, B, connect with the text, digest it in some way, okay? If the text is, if you've got, you know, non-readers or kids that like, you're like, no way, they can't read this, maybe it's just annotating next to the images, talking about the images with the partner, just some way for them to connect with it, okay? Then we close our books, we're done, day 1. We're not doing the key details main idea lesson. We go right into an explicit phonics and language lesson. So, like I said, and this is also California users, even though we don't see this, like this is the way that it's like the suggested pacing guide. That lesson, lesson number 8, where we're introducing our spelling, that doesn't happen until midweek. I moved that up to the first day of the week. That way the kids can practice all week long as one of their independent center, you know, may-dos, must-dos, whatever you want. It's independent practice at that point. And I do the same for the grammar because, like I said, it's embedded in that draft lesson, which is not until day 4. So I'm not drafting day 1, but I am teaching them explicitly what subject-verb agreement, what pronouns are, okay, and what that looks like. And then that way they have all week. So after I do that quick explicit lesson, I then go into our writing lesson for the day, which for California, most of the time it's analyze the prompt. And what that looks like is we analyze for the 3 main areas, the main topic, the type of writing, and then the source that we'll be using. Now, benchmark has you analyzing for a ton of different things. Eventually, you can work your way up to that. With my third graders, I just focus on those 3 things, and I find that works. All right. So that's my day 1. Now day 2, when we come back, we sit down all together. We open our books back up. I say, okay, remember yesterday we read about what's our text? Well, I don't have it near me. But remember we read about our first short read. Now I want you to tell me what you circled. So when you annotated yesterday, when you were connecting with the text, there had to be some words that were tricky in there that you hadn't seen. What'd you circle? Let's talk about them. And that's where I will do like a very informal context clues lesson, basically, or some sort of build vocabulary strategy. Now, if you have an explicit lesson that week, that might fit right there or right there after you read your second short read, okay? If not, don't skip over that, because kids will need that to make sense of this text. In order to be successful in their analysis of the other parts of it, they're going to need to know like the gist of what they're reading. All right, so then after we've done that, I say, okay, now is going to be our first, comprehension-based lesson. We're going to pull out all the key details and the main idea in this text. So that's usually our first lesson. Later on in the year, after you've done key details and main idea 50,000 times, maybe you can use that precious whole group time for something else. So then day 3, and then we do the writing lesson. Then day 3 is like the switch where we finish up short read 1 and then we switch over to short read 2. And we follow the same protocol where I read it, they read it, and then the next day we close read it, okay? So that 3 reads method, what I'm referring to that I just kind of invented myself, is down here. So let's start plugging things in. Short read 1, I'm gonna write the title here, Aristotle and Democracy. And then short read 2, the Iroquois Confederacy. And this little section here, short reads, you don't have them, so you can just ignore that piece there. So now with my red, I'm gonna go and do all of my close reading or comprehension-based lessons and plug them in, and then I will circle back and fill out the spelling and the grammar. So comprehension, what that looks for me is it starts day 2. We'll typically start with that key details, main idea lesson. So I'm gonna write lesson number 2, and I'm going to write key details, main idea, right? And I'm just plugging in these skills. Okay. Now, the next day, I see that my next lesson is a context clues lesson. I'm going to hold off on putting that into my weekly plans, and I'm going to maybe just write that right here and try to fit that in there. I will preface and say like week 1 is like the week that you have to be the most creative, because there are 7 close reading lessons and 5 days, or really like 4 days if you prefer to not do close reading the very first day. So that's where I'm manipulating and moving around the most. Day 3, I'm going to go straight to lesson 5, which is the draw conclusions. And I know that that's a lesson that spirals back in week 3. So mental note, like I can let it go after 20 minutes. All right, now day 4, I'm gonna do 2 close reading lessons for the second short read. So that's going to be lesson 10, which is the analyzing the figurative language lesson. And then lesson 13, where it's point of view. Now, day 5 is always lesson 14, that compare lesson, compare, contrast, or integrate information. So this is how my week unfolds in terms of close reading. In the beginning of the year, your assessment might take this entire block, and that's okay. What are you gonna do? You know, just a mental note, like, okay, if you're skipping these lessons, maybe start to make time for them eventually. That's what happens with my partner teacher and I. This is test take time. All right, so now I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna fill in my phonics, or my spelling for the week. So week 1, short vowels. These are going to be words that you're going to find in the reading. Passenger, compact, patent, principles, subjects, originally, colony, and persecution. Just 8 words. Okay, so I listed my words here just so I have them handy to reference. And then I'm going to explicitly teach what short vowels are on day 1 or Monday, do like a word sort, and then we're going to come back to it day 3, and we're going to apply, or read find the spelling words or the spelling pattern in context. So that's where you're going to find your word study text, and it's that shorter 1-page text that's after your 2 short reads. It's always like topically aligned, so it fits right into your unit, and it's full of words that follow the spelling pattern. So what I typically do is I'll have my kids either do a word sort or highlighter hunt, just something where they're going through and they're finding the words in context. And that text is the Mayflower Compact. And the lesson that goes with that in Benchmark is lesson 11. So that is what that looks like. Okay. And now I'm going to fill out my language and then my writing. So my language for week 1 is subject, verb agreement, and pronouns. And my first lesson for writing is going to be lesson number 3. And remember, we said it is a narrative. And I wrote specifically what it is. So the kids are going to be writing a journal entry describing one of the speeches. So there's going to be 2 speeches that they read. So they can choose one of them and their reactions to it. So in Benchmark, there's the model prompt and there's the teacher prompt. So that's how they slightly vary. The topic slightly varies, but the type of writing and the source will be the same. So what I like to do is just choose one of them and use that as my model and as what the kids are doing. But the way that Benchmark intends for it is that you're modeling using the model prompt, and then the students are transferring the, writing, the skills you're teaching them and applying it to their own prompt. So now, the next day is lesson 6, where you're finding text evidence. Then lesson 9, plan, 12, draft. And sometimes I like to throw that in there, like, so you can sometimes start drafting even during your planning day. Sometimes that works out. And then also the planning day is really where you can bring in your other writing strategies that you know and love. So your thinking maps, your step up to writing colors. That's what I do anyway. All right, and then finally, day 5 is the revise and edit lesson. So lesson 15, that's where there's going to be 1 revision skill, 1 edit skill. And they pull out 1 sentence from their draft, revise it using the skill, pull out 1 sentence from their draft, edit it using the skills. I don't make them go and revise and edit the entire thing. I find it to be more impactful when they're just making, 2 sentences better with the application of what you're teaching them that day. Amy, do you read it in its entirety? Yes, I do. All right. And remember, like, I always teach my anchor chart first. I do that for every single unit. So I'm building a lot of the background knowledge and a lot of the concepts already. So when you're reading it to them the first time around, like, they're already able to start making those connections, and hopefully they're not just checking out. And also, that's, like I said, it's your opportunity to like really bring it to life. It's definitely definitely better for those fictional texts too, those narratives where like the kids want to know what happens. They don't want to like stop it midway, find the key details or key events, and then pick it back up the next day. At least that's what I don't like doing. So maybe that's like my own what I'm projecting on the kids, but they seem to like it better also and be like, just read a text for reading, for enjoying, and then we go in and comprehend later. Okay, now week 2, I'm going to just show my completed plans and explain the progression here. It's really going to be like weeks 2 and weeks 3 are a lot easier than week 1 because you've got less close reading lessons and only one text, so you're not doing like a switcheroo on day 3. So we've got Queen Elizabeth I of England. So it's a good text. You'll like it if you haven't done it yet. The first time we just read it for enjoyment, I teach them. You'll be teaching them about Queen Elizabeth I. They can read and annotate if there's time. It's when there's an extended read, it's longer, so sometimes there's not enough time or stamina for the kids to go immediately after and do a second read. It's kind of up to you. You gauge it. If you've read the whole thing to them and they're like tired and they need to move, pick it back up the next day. You start the next day with them annotating. Okay, now let's talk about the vocabulary, then go into close reading. So I just do one of these lessons. So since I'm not breaking it up, I'm just going to do the key details and summarize either a portion or like just overall. And for those lessons, I find that the TRS like gives more than enough examples, and sometimes they're not even the examples that I myself pull out or my kids pull out. So I tend to let my kids lead those lessons, and I say, okay, you pull out what did you think was important so far, and we talk about it, we discuss and we process, and I find that that's just as effective. All right, and then the next day we have lesson 6. So that's where they're using text evidence. So that lesson that doesn't come up again is kind of isolated there. Cite text evidence. Then 8 and 11, so point of view, and then analyze figurative language to determine point of view just immediately after. That probably is going to be a nice segue. And then 14, the integrate information. And I didn't go into that lesson, but that is probably going to be using the extended read and then one or both of the short reads from week 1. Because it'll go back to it. And then writing is an informative essay, so they're going to be explaining problems and solutions. And they're going to follow the same progression: text evidence, plan, draft, revise, and edit. If you're a national teacher and if you're following the same like pattern as all the other grade levels, it's going to be your first performance task, and it's going to be like answer 2-part questions, constructive response, multiple response. It's going to look a little different. Your day 5 is always going to be build language, so it's going to be like a language lesson, grammar. If anyone's from national, can you like confirm that for me? Let me know. I just don't have access to the national 6th grade program. I'm just making connections from the other ones. And then phonics, you've got long vowels with your 8 words. And then the language is shift and verb tense and perfect tense. So that's what you're going to be focusing on when you are drafting. You're going to be highlighting that in your writing. All right. And week 3, you're going to read about current Queen Elizabeth. And the kids are immediately going to be able to make comparisons. It talks about how her role has changed, basically like she has 0 power, whereas the first Queen Elizabeth, all the power. So, and what the current queen, what her responsibilities are, who she collaborates with. It's good. I had fun reading about it. So we'll follow up day 2 after we've read the text, just to read and enjoy it and learn. We'll look at the vocab, then we'll do the key details and central ideas. Then I put the genre features, the biography genre features lesson there, but like I said, that might be something you want to teach in the beginning of the unit before you read the 2 biographical texts. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm totally missing something and it belongs right there. It's up to you. And then lesson 8 is the draw conclusion or analyze idea development. And then 11, domain-specific vocabulary. So it's that vocabulary lesson. And then 14, integrate information using both of the extended reads. So I didn't go into that lesson, but I imagine, you're comparing and contrasting Queen Elizabeth first and the second. This might come into play if you don't do it as a pre-teach. Okay. Then for your writing, you've got an argumentative essay following the same pattern, and then the closed syllable pattern. Oops, I put close. Close. All right, and your language focus, what you're going to be weaving into your writing is shifts in pronouns and person. And again, like I explicitly teach that day 1 on Monday for me. And then it's also taught within context. And I forgot, there's that word study text, always day 3. In week 2, that is the Commonwealth. And then week 3, that's the United Nations. So the lesson numbers are slightly different between weeks 1, and then weeks 2 and weeks 3. But in weeks 2 and 3, that word study lesson is lesson 12. And that's it, everybody. That's how I do it. Once I finish up with this, then I'm crazy and I open my plan book, and then I then again transfer it into my plan book. But a lot of teachers just use this and have this be their general plan. It's certainly all there for you. And like I said, the goal of today is hopefully that you can feel like you can be flexible, feel like you can move things around for what makes sense for you, and bring in some of your own flair and your own strategies that you already know and love. That way, you feel better about teaching benchmark. All right, guys, I'm going to link the email sign up for you in the comments right now. Let me get that for you. And then I will also go to our event, our 6th grade planning Facebook event. I'll go into that and I'll post in there this link, and then I'll post the link for the replay of this video if you want to ever come back to it. All right. There we go. Okay, and if you input your email address and you, for whatever reason, don't automatically get my email, it's probably because your district flagged it. So since it's automatic, it might get picked up as spam. So either check your spam folder, or if it's blocked completely, try a personal email address. And there you go, everybody. It's all together in a zipped file waiting for you. All right. Have a good night. Bye.